There's a kind of strength that doesn't need to be loud, a kind of presence that doesn't beg to be noticed, but once it enters the room, people feel it. In a world obsessed with attention and performance, the most attractive men are not the ones trying to impress. They're the ones who've mastered themselves. Their words are few, their gaze steady, their presence unshakable. This video explores the Stoic art of quiet attraction, how men like Marcus Aurelius and Epictetus cultivated respect and magnetism without chasing it. You'll learn how to become emotionally grounded, internally validated, and deeply magnetic without saying much at all. Because true confidence isn't loud. It doesn't perform. It simply is. And when you embody that stillness, that calm clarity, not only do others begin to notice, they begin to respect, admire, and follow without needing to be asked. Let's begin your journey into quiet power, the kind that speaks without a word. When you are mysterious, you control her mind. Most men lose their appeal in the very first moments, not because they lack looks, money, or status, but because they talk too much. They rush to reveal everything about themselves, hoping to be seen, to be liked, but that is exactly the mistake that makes them predictable, easily figured out, and easily overlooked. You don't need to try to impress. You need to make her ask questions. Mystery is a quiet form of power. When she can't read you, her mind begins to imagine every silence, every time you don't reply immediately. Every action left unexplained becomes an unfinished puzzle in her mind. And what is unfinished will always keep people thinking. Women are not drawn to a picture that's complete from the start. They are pulled in by intentional ambiguity. She begins to wonder, why hasn't he responded? What is he doing? Is he not interested? Or is he testing me? That uncertainty is what keeps her around, paying attention, searching for answers. But this is not a game of manipulation. A man who is truly mysterious isn't pretending. He doesn't need to lay out his whole story at the first meeting, not because he's arrogant, but because he knows that real value takes time to be seen, not advertised. Weak men seek instant understanding. Men with depth let others discover them one piece at a time. True attraction doesn't lie in words or loud gestures. It lies in the ability to be silently grounded, without rushing to fill the space with validation. Let her get used to uncertainty. Let her imagination do the rest. And in the meantime, you keep living your life without haste, without waiting, without worry, because a man who truly knows his worth never chases attention. He lets attention come to him naturally and without force. That is the first step toward freedom. And the first step to mastering yourself in any relationship. Power doesn't come from yelling, but from leading in silence. There's a paradox most people don't realize. Women may say they want a man who listens, who is always gentle, who always asks for their opinion. But deep down, they crave someone who leads. Not a man who dominates, bullies, or behaves like a dictator, but a man who is calm, clear, and decisive. A man who isn't afraid to make decisions. Someone who can say, let's go somewhere tonight, and make it feel exciting, not like an order. Women don't want to be the ones always at the wheel. They don't want to constantly suggest, guide, or carry the emotional load of the relationship. A deep part of them is tired of controlling everything. And when they meet a man with the strength to lead, without making noise, they finally breathe because they can finally let go. The problem is, many men are afraid to lead. They fear rejection. They're afraid of seeming controlling. They wait for approval in every detail, and they let the other person decide everything. But that lack of decisiveness is exactly what makes them fade into the background. Attraction doesn't come from always being right. It comes from knowing what you want and not being afraid to act on it. A man of value doesn't ask for permission to live his way. He walks his path with clarity and invites others to walk with him. He doesn't beg them to follow. And along the way, you will face resistance. You will be misunderstood. doubted. But that is where character is forged. If you're afraid of every opinion, every glance, then you're not leading. You're being led by fear. Remember this. Assertiveness is not the absence of listening. It's knowing when to listen and when to step forward without needing approval. That is the presence of a true man, one who doesn't need to prove himself, but when he walks into a room, people make space for him to lead. Not through noise, but through certainty from within. That kind of power cannot be memorized. It can only be forged through consistency and quiet confidence. And when you truly embody this, you won't just attract others. You'll attract the strongest version of yourself to step forward. The man who makes her struggle with herself. No one likes to admit this. But the truth is, women don't dream of perfect men. They aren't drawn to pure niceness, to the man who always agrees, always approves, always gets everything right. They're drawn to the man who makes them feel multiple things at once: curiosity, challenge, excitement, and sometimes confusion. That's the unspoken forbidden fantasy, the attraction that comes from being challenged, from feeling like they can't completely control this person, from being pulled towards someone they can't easily predict. The man who triggers this doesn't need to act like a jerk. He just needs to be himself with his own edges, his own principles, his refusal to nod at everything just to be liked. He knows when to joke, when to be serious, when to be silent, when to pull back to create space, and when to show up at just the right moment to create surprise. Attraction doesn't come from being easy to get. It comes from making others struggle to understand you, to hold on to you, and sometimes to understand their own feelings for you. But more importantly, you don't do this to manipulate. You do this because you're not willing to trade your identity for approval. You're not a mirror for others' desires. You are a man with your own light. And that light, that's what unsettles her, draws her in, and keeps her coming back. Not because you chased her, but because you made her chase feelings she never understood before. That's what no one says out loud, but it is the true power of a man who knows who he is. When she sees you can walk away, that's when she starts wanting to keep you. Women aren't always attracted to the best man. They're drawn to the man who could walk away at any moment and still remain calm, as if he never needed anything from them to begin with. There's an unconscious fear we all carry, the fear of losing something we don't yet fully control. And in relationships, that fear intensifies. She can't fully bond with someone who's too predictable, too available, too dependent on her presence. She only truly wants to keep a man when she knows he doesn't need her to feel whole. Many men ruin their initial attraction by being too available. They reply instantly. They cancel their plans just to see her. They orbit around her like she's the sun, not realizing that this erodes their value in her eyes. A man with real magnetism isn't cold or distant. He simply has a world so full on its own that no one else becomes its sole center. He has his own goals, passions, and a life that doesn't revolve around anyone. He may care deeply, but he will never trade himself just to stay. And it's when she sees that you can turn away, not out of anger, not out of spite, not to guilt trip, but simply because you choose peace over attachment. That's when she starts to worry. Worried she might lose something rare, a man free enough not to need bonds, but still chooses to stay because he wants to. That's the difference between someone who's begged to stay and someone who's invited to remain, between the one who pleads and the one whose silence cannot be ignored. You don't need to threaten to leave. You only need to live as if you could leave at any moment and still not lose yourself. And in that moment, she will look at you with entirely different eyes. Create emotional storms, but keep the reins in your hands. Women don't remember the men who made them feel safe all day long. They remember the ones who made them feel everything: surprise, joy, excitement, even confusion, and a little disorientation. Not because they crave chaos, but because emotion is where the feminine nature finds its aliveness. When you make her laugh, then go quiet just long enough to make her wonder, then compliment her exactly when she didn't expect it, you're leading her through an emotional journey she can't predict. The mistake most men make is trying to be so stable. They become boring. They think always kind, always accommodating is what keeps a woman. But the truth is, if all you offer is safety, you become categorized as predictable, and predictable means forgettable. What attracts women is intentional contrast. A man who can listen deeply, but also holds back some of his thoughts. A man who can be close, but knows when to pull back to create space. A man who makes her feel valued, but never fully graspable. The key is to create emotional waves that you control. You're not playing with her mind. You're creating rhythm like a song with highs and silences. And you never lose yourself in the process. A man with depth doesn't try to make others infatuated. He simply lives in tune with his inner rhythm. And that rhythm, when it's unlike anyone else's, is what makes her unable to look away. Attraction doesn't lie in always being cheerful or always agreeable. It lies in your ability to navigate emotion with subtlety, without being carried away by it. You are the one who stirs the waves, but you're never the one drowned by them. When a compliment becomes a reward, not a common item, women, no matter how strong or confident, still crave recognition. They want to feel attractive, special, chosen. But here's the paradox. When recognition comes too easily, it quickly loses its value. Many men get stuck here. They believe compliments will win her over. They compliment constantly. You're so beautiful. You're really smart. You're special. There's nothing wrong with praising her. What's wrong is making it a mindless habit. When you say something too often, it becomes routine and no longer sparks emotional impact. A wise man doesn't withhold praise, he chooses when and why to give it. Not just for appearance, but for effort. Not just because she's lovely today, but because of how she handled a tough situation with strength. When a compliment has a reason behind it, it goes deep. When it's filtered, she pauses and thinks, he really noticed. And sometimes, silence is the most powerful recognition. When you don't say what she expects to hear, she starts to wonder. Silence creates space. And in that space, imagination begins to work. That's when she starts seeking your validation, instead of you chasing hers. Your appeal doesn't lie in your words. It lies in your inner freedom, the ability to remain calm without needing to validate anything. You know what you think, how you feel, and you don't need to express it constantly. You make her guess. You make her wait. And in that process, she bonds more deeply without realizing why. A well-timed compliment can change the mood. A well-placed pause can spark desire. And a man who doesn't rush to praise the world, but only acknowledges what is truly worthy, will always make others long to be part of his world. Your voice is inner power made audible. There are people who walk into a room without saying a word, without an introduction, without trying to attract attention, yet all eyes turn toward them. And when they speak, no one wants to interrupt, because their voice carries something rare, control, and a deep calm that comes from within. Women are more perceptive than you think. They don't just listen to what you say. They feel the emotional weight behind every breath, every pause, every shift in tone. And the truth is, a voice that is low, slow, and steady triggers a primal response in their minds. It evokes safety, strength, and mystery at the same time. In contrast, a voice that is too fast, too high, or too frantic doesn't just make you less attractive. It makes others feel like you're being led by inner tension, not by presence. A man with character doesn't speak often, but when he does, his words carry weight. Not because he tries to sound serious, but because he doesn't need to fill the space with chatter. His presence is already enough. Want to increase your presence? Start by slowing your voice. Don't rush to reply. Don't fear silence. Don't hesitate to pause before speaking. When you control the rhythm of your voice, you control the energy in the room. And when she sits across from you, listening to every word, feeling the steadiness in your breath, what happens isn't just attraction. It's a sense of being enveloped in a grounded, steady presence, something rarer than any physical charm. Because real power doesn't need to shout. It just needs to be carried through a voice that reflects a deep, stable soul. The right touch is the language of presence. Some touches feel like invasion, but others light, natural, brief, linger in memory for a long time. The difference lies in one thing. Were you fully present when you touched her? Touch is not about control. It's not about claiming territory. An attractive man doesn't touch to dominate space. He touches to convey calm, safety, and subtlety. A hand gently placed on her back as you lead her through a crowd. A brief touch on the arm when you laugh at something she said. Not excessive intimacy, but the sign of someone who knows where he is and what he's leaving behind. But here's what matters most. Touch is never the goal. It is the outcome of a connection that has already been built through eye contact, through words, through mindful attention. When she feels seen, understood, and respected, a light touch carries far more meaning than any loud or uncontrolled move. And because you don't touch casually, every time you do, it creates a wave of feeling in her mind. You're not seeking moments to touch. You're creating a sense of closeness without crossing boundaries. The attractive man isn't always physically present. He's the one who can touch someone emotionally with intentional, refined presence. And in those subtle touches, you don't just leave a trace on her skin, you leave a lasting impression in her mind. You don't need to touch often, just at the right moment. You don't need to force connection. Just be present enough for connection to happen naturally, because real presence doesn't need to be declared. It just needs to be felt. Look at her as if you've seen something she hasn't yet seen in herself. There's a kind of gaze that makes people uncomfortable, not because it lacks respect, but because it's too obvious, rushed, craving, or filled with a desire to be reciprocated. But there's another kind of gaze. One that makes the other person feel truly seen. Not many know how to use their eyes correctly. They either avoid eye contact or hold it too long and make things awkward. But a man who knows himself holds his gaze deliberately, just long enough for her to feel the connection, yet not long enough for her to fully read what's going on inside him. When you look at someone for just one breath longer, then deliberately look away, you leave a question in their mind. It's not an empty look, it's a look that makes them wonder, what is he thinking? Why did that gaze make me feel like I was just discovered? Don't underestimate this. The eyes are where emotions can't hide, but at the same time, it's where you convey your calm, strength, and inner depth without a single word. The reason your gaze is magnetic is not because it's intense, it's because you look at her as if you've seen something in her, something she hasn't even named for herself. Attraction isn't in the light. It's in the shadow of your gaze, where she sees a reflection of herself she's never spoken out loud. And what's special is this: that gaze doesn't come from desire. It comes from presence, from not rushing to prove anything, from not needing confirmation. You simply look, and in doing so, when you look at her as if you don't need to possess her, she will want to stay longer, just to be seen that way again. When she can't figure you out, she starts to follow every trace. Nothing kills attraction faster than predictability. A man who always texts on time, always agrees, always says, whatever you want, always bends, will soon become a safe habit. And in love, a safe habit is what drives people to seek excitement elsewhere. Women don't consciously crave an unpredictable man, but their hearts are drawn to exactly that. someone whose emotions can't be pinned down, someone who's gentle today but silent tomorrow, someone who keeps them wondering. And that kind of attraction doesn't come from playing games. It comes from living truthfully. A man with clear goals, personal passions, and unwavering values naturally becomes unpredictable. Not because he's trying to be mysterious, but because his life doesn't revolve around anyone else. He doesn't reply immediately not to create distance, but because he's busy walking his path. He doesn't answer every question not to dodge, but because not everything needs explanation. Women are drawn to what they can't fully have. When you're always present, always clear, always reassuring, you unknowingly give away the one thing that keeps her thinking about you: mystery. Let her wonder. Don't answer everything. Live truthfully but not transparently. When you're not desperate to be understood, not anxious to prove love, you give something more precious than words, a selective presence. And when she feels like she hasn't figured you out, she'll pay more attention. She'll notice the little things, the silences, the shifts. And in that moment, you're already in her mind. No effort, no strategy. You're simply the one she's still trying to understand. When you're rejected, it's not a failure, but a test of inner strength. Rejection is inevitable in any relationship. No matter how calm, attractive, or deep you are, there will be times when you're ignored, not reciprocated, or coldly pushed away. But what separates a resilient man from the rest isn't whether he gets rejected, it's how he responds when it happens. The weak man takes rejection as a denial of his worth. He feels small, angry, desperate to cling to what's slipping away. But the grounded man is different. He looks straight at the pain without denying it. He doesn't run from emotion, but he doesn't let it define him either. Stoicism teaches us what's outside is not in our control. People's reactions, their feelings, their choices. The only thing we can govern is our inner world, our thoughts, our actions, our responses. And when you practice this, even in rejection, you keep your calm and your self-respect. Being rejected doesn't mean you're not good enough. It simply means you weren't the right fit for them. That's their freedom. But the question you should ask is, am I being true to myself? Am I standing by my values? Will I let this rejection shake my foundation? A man of depth doesn't beg those who don't want to stay. He doesn't lash out, doesn't retaliate, doesn't seek to wound back. He quietly steps away, holding on to his calm, and keeps walking, not out of pride, but because that's the only way to protect his dignity. And strangely, that steadiness, that quiet strength, as a door closes, makes you more attractive than ever. Not to the one who left, but to yourself, because you've walked through pain and didn't lose your direction. Resilience doesn't mean you don't feel pain. It means you don't let pain steal your integrity. And once you master that no one can truly bring you down, detach from the need to be loved and feel lighter than ever. One of the biggest causes of anxiety, stress, and insecurity in relationships is this: the dependency on feeling loved, noticed, needed. Not because love is wrong, but because too many people tie their self-worth to whether or not someone else loves them. When you live seeking validation, you're always tense. Every unread message makes you uneasy. Every silence makes you overthink. You start acting out of character just to hold on to a fading connection and call it love. But the truth is, you're clinging to the feeling of being loved to avoid facing the emptiness inside. Stoicism doesn't tell you to reject love. It teaches you to love deeply, but without dependence, without gripping, without losing yourself. When you love without needing to be loved back to feel whole, that's not coldness, that's freedom. That's when you stop fearing loss because you realize you're not really losing anything except what was never yours. Imagine if you no longer needed anyone's approval, no longer feared abandonment, no longer strained to keep a perfect image. How light would your mind feel? How much worry would fade? How many invisible weights would lift? Inner freedom doesn't come from being deeply loved. It comes from knowing who you are, living in truth, and standing steady no matter who walks in or out of your life. And here's the irony. When you no longer need love to feel worthy, you become more magnetic. Because people are drawn to wholeness, to those who've made peace with themselves, who don't need filling. Love without needing to be loved. Give without expecting return. That's not detachment. That's maturity born from self-mastery. When you stop needing control, you begin to taste true freedom. In relationships, many men fall into a quiet trap. They try to control. Control how the other thinks, feels, acts. Control the outcome. Control the pace. They believe if I control enough, I'll keep her. I'll protect the love. I'll preserve my place. But the truth is, the more you try to control, the more anxious you become. The more you grip tightly, the more you lose your peace. True, lasting attraction doesn't come from those who manipulate others. It comes from those who aren't ruled by their own emotions. A free man isn't someone who has it all. He's someone who knows when to let go, who lets things unfold without losing himself. Stoicism teaches this. You can't control people, circumstances, or outcomes, but you can control your response. And in letting go of control, you begin to gain something greater than certainty, inner freedom. You don't need to know what she's thinking. You don't need to change her mind. You don't need to win every conversation. You just need to live with integrity, act from your values, and let the rest unfold as it must. When you stop playing to win, you start living truthfully. When you stop manipulating outcomes, you start loving without fear. When you stop trying to steer others, you become yourself. And that's when you're at your strongest. No need to cling. Those who stay, choose to stay. No need to prove. Your actions will speak. No need to strain for control. The free man knows when to release and stay at peace. And finally, you realize, it's not relationships that make you happy. It's the freedom within them. When you're no longer bound by expectations, fear, control, or the need to prove, you begin to truly live. Attraction isn't a strategy, it's a state of being. You don't need to manipulate anyone. You don't need to play mind games. You only need to master yourself deeply enough so you're no longer pulled by craving, fear, or insecurity when stepping into connection. When you live by clear values, stay calm through emotion, move slowly, don't cling, don't control. You don't have to become attractive. You already are. And when you enter a room with that presence, all eyes will find you. Not because you sought attention, but because the inner freedom within you is undeniable.